On today's show, we have a crossover edition episode with Matt George from Locked On Kings as we explore De'Aaron Fox to Houston trade scenarios. What are the motivations for both organizations in possibly making a deal? What would a trade ultimately look like? What are the sticking points for both sides? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. We want your hypothetical trade scenarios for De'Aaron Fox in the YouTube comments, or maybe if you don't want De'Aaron Fox at all, let us know as well. Or just do a drive-by, say Go Rockets. It helps us out a ton. Be sure to subscribe to our new daily Locked On Rockets newsletter as well. Would sincerely appreciate that. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer.
It's a conversation that's going to pick up more and more as the year goes on. A De'Aaron Fox trade to the Houston Rockets. Houston is widely considered the most ideal destination for Fox, at least from the Sacramento perspective, because of what Houston has potentially to offer in a deal. I think a lot of people would say San Antonio sounds like the most fun landing destination for Fox with a Fox and Wemby combo, but their Texas neighbors, Houston, I don't think would like that to happen. Jackson Gatlin of Locked On Rockets, Matt George of Locked On Kings. Let's do our best to kind of negotiate and talk our way through what a De'Aaron Fox trade conversation to Houston would look like. Also, important context to add here, Houston is De'Aaron Fox's hometown. He just recently built a house in Houston. His family is from Houston, so he has a lot of ties to Houston, just to add on a little extra element to this. But Jackson, when a lot of people are talking about this trade, they're saying, okay, this is a trade that doesn't happen this season. This is a trade that happens next summer, in the offseason. Why is that from the Rockets' perspective? Why do you think this is a trade, or do you think this is a trade that can't happen until this summer?
I don't subscribe to the idea that it's a trade that can't happen until the summer. I think that there are variations of this trade that could happen in season. I will say that it's a little bit, I think, more challenging to make this trade happen in season. And one of the reasons that I think we see it postponed until potentially this upcoming offseason is because the Rockets have maintained this mentality towards their young core for a while now, that they are not in a position of being pressured into making a move. They don't have like a ticking clock on, oh, we have to make an all-in move. We need to trade for a guy like a De'Aaron Fox this season to make something happen, to make a push this postseason. The Rockets have already far exceeded expectations this season by being one of the best teams in the NBA so far this year. They've doubled down on what was a top 10 defense last year. They've been one of the best defenses in the NBA so far this season. And yes, unfortunately, their Achilles heel has been their ability to execute offensively, especially in crunch time situations. They've lost a handful of games this year just because they just couldn't put points on the board. And yes, De'Aaron Fox, a trade for Fox, would help alleviate that situation. But it's also one of those where you don't want to lose sight of the forest for the trees, right? You know, do you want to go, quote unquote, all in on De'Aaron Fox and cash in some of the pieces of the young core as well as future draft assets if you could get potentially a potentially better player or a better fitting player down the line, a la a Devin Booker or somebody else, if you waited until this upcoming offseason? So that's some of the Rockets side of why this trade might be pushed off until this offseason.
So let me offer kind of a word of caution as a friend from the Sacramento perspective, because the Rockets very much remind me. Now they're complete opposite in the case of they've made this push and exploded to start this year on the backs of their defense and this Ime Udoka mentality of we're going to out physical you, we're going to bully you, we're going to beat you up. The Kings 2 seasons ago exploded onto the scene and made it to the playoffs and had that amazing season on the backs of their offense. But what has gotten the Kings to this point where they just fired their head coach, Mike Brown, who was the unanimous coach of the year a year and a half ago, what got the Kings to this point is inactivity, too much patience. They went through 2 trade deadlines, did nothing, went through their first offseason after the playoff year, just ran it back. So while I understand Houston might not feel like they're on the clock, and they shouldn't. They have something that you could see be successful for the foreseeable future. The Houston Rockets find themselves in a position where they're near the top of an extremely loaded Western Conference. You're not guaranteed to ever get back there. So if you're Houston, you do have to strongly consider, in my opinion, you do have to strongly consider, hey, do we try and go for it right now? Because not only could, knock on wood, there be injury issues going forward, there could also be teams that aren't very good right now that suddenly become good and figure things out, not to mention the juggernauts of the world like the Los Angeles Lakers that just seem to find great trades out of nowhere for some reason, right? I think the Houston Rockets have to be aware of, while I do understand completely if they were to push this off to the offseason and be patient, they have to be aware of, hey, if we're here, if it's the trade deadline and we're in second, third place and we're in the mix to actually win the Western Conference, we might want to go for it right now.
I fully agree with your sentiment there, Matt, and I've been echoing the same thing on Locked on Rockets pretty consistently. Look, opportunity is not a lengthy visitor, right? You can't sit on your hands and wait for the, perfect trade or the perfect star to suddenly materialize. You need to take advantage of this opportunity as it presents itself. And I think the context of this conversation and their mentality towards this potential trade deadline and pursuing a star like De'Aaron Fox, it's just important in the confines of any potential negotiations taking place, right? The Rockets don't feel that pressure to make a deal. And I think that's the important thing, because they're not leveraging against themselves, right? They're not going to bid against themselves. They're not going to overpay for a player like Fox when they don't feel the pressure to achieve this season. Now, would a Fox trade be amazing for this Rockets team? I think it would. I think Fox would be an incredible complementary, or not an incredible complementary piece, I apologize. He would immediately become the best player on the team, but I think he would fit perfectly into what the Rockets are doing. He'd give Sengun the 2-man game partner that he's desperately needed in a Rockets jersey, because it's not Fred VanVleet right now. It's not Jalen Green. Those guys have individually had some big games, but they're not consistently good enough to run that 2-man game to be the bread and butter of the Rockets offense. And you already kind of drew the parallels, the differences between the Kings a couple years ago, right? They built their success when they were the 3 seed on the backs of their offense. And at that point in time, it was a like record breaking, historic NBA offense, right? The Rockets are doing it with their defense. And I think that's what kind of shifts the identity of these two teams a little bit, where, you might see some conversations about, okay, well, why would De'Aaron Fox work in Houston with a player in Alperen Sengun who already has a similar skill set and play style to a Domantas Sabonis? And I think that's kind of the big issue here, is the Rockets have built a defensive identity versus the Kings that built an offensive identity. And unfortunately, offenses are a lot more volatile than defense. Defense travels. Defense is something that is reliable, sustainable. You can kind of, you can rely on your defense a little bit more regularly, I think, than you can rely on a high-octane offense at the NBA level.
Well, something you said there that I think is important is you talked about waiting for the perfect piece. I'm not trying to oversell De'Aaron Fox, but De'Aaron might be it. Because you talk about someone who offensively will immediately grant the boost that you're looking for and that the Rockets have been lacking. But defensively, De'Aaron Fox has developed into one of the best defensive guards in the league. He just is. Like, people may not understand that, or they don't see it enough because they don't watch De'Aaron Fox enough. When De'Aaron Fox wants to be, he is the best, or one of the best defensive guards in the league, period. And I'm not just talking about steals. He led the league in steals last year, barely beating Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I'm not just talking about those numbers. De'Aaron Fox is one of the only star guards in this league that is expected to carry the primary scoring role on offense, who also is defending the opposing team's best guard. You don't see that often. The best guards in the league are typically being hidden on defense or kept away to conserve energy. That's not who De'Aaron Fox is. Last night, the Sacramento Kings took on the Philadelphia 76ers. De'Aaron Fox guarded Tyrese Maxey pretty much the entire game, even spent some time on Paul George when he had to with Keegan Murray being out. Right, this is who De'Aaron Fox is. So Fox fits, I think, this defensive identity, and Ime Udoka can bring out that defensive fire that Fox has while also boosting the offense. That's why I think De'Aaron is the guy that Houston should 100% be targeting, even over a Devin Booker, in my opinion. I think De'Aaron Fox is overall a better player for the Houston Rockets than Devin Booker is.
I'm right there with you, Matt. Honestly, between the two, I lean Fox as well. I think he is the primary ball handler that the Rockets have been really searching for. And I think that at the end of the day, the conversation tends to gravitate towards, oh, well, Fox isn't a 1A star, right? And I don't. I don't know if he actually, I'm not going to go so far as to say he is a 1A star, because I don't know if he is even on paper. The numbers look incredible, but I do think that in the right situation, right, you put him in on this Houston team with Alperen Sengun as his running mate. I think you get the best of both worlds with those two guys, right? Two guys who will absolutely complement each other to where you get the best versions of both of them in the two-man game. And then you put this elite defense around them, wing defenders like Dylan Brooks, Amin Thompson, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari, Eason possibly, whatever's potentially left over after this hypothetical trade that we're going to dissect here in just a moment, then this Houston Rockets team is going to be cooking with some grease.
I'll add one more little bit of context too before we start actually getting into the weeds of what this trade looks like. And that's that the Sacramento Kings aren't necessarily pressured to make this move right now either. I think there is still some kind of optimism that the Kings and Fox can find a solution and work things out here in Sacramento. I don't know if that's best for either party at this point. I also don't think the Sacramento Kings are doing a very good job by firing the head coach that De'Aaron Fox went to bat for. So that might be another reason why this trade waits into the offseason, is because maybe the Kings try and make it work this year. They go into the offseason and either Rich Paul and De'Aaron and Clutch Sports say, we're done, get us out of here. Or the Kings just don't feel like it's going to work and they try and cash in and get something while they can for a superstar in De'Aaron Fox. But we're going to talk about the players that might come back to Sacramento or should be considered to come back to Sacramento in this deal coming up in the next segment. Before that, though, want to let you know that this episode of the Locked On Kings podcast and the Locked On Rockets podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, and it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many different ways for you to pick up a W. You can really get creative with it, whether you're betting on which players will score a touchdown or how many points each team will score. It's thrilling, especially, Jackson, if you're a Raider fan like myself, where there's no reason to watch football at this point. But hey, maybe you can watch two other teams that are competing and have a little more to root for in that sense. Of course, you can always bet on great NBA action on FanDuel as well all season long. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So we know the primary piece in this trade that is going to Houston, of course, is De'Aaron Fox. But the question is, what can the Sacramento Kings get back? Again, it's widely considered, not just in Sacramento, but to many experts around the NBA, that Houston potentially has the best treasure trove of assets that they'd be willing to move to Sacramento in this deal. What's tricky about the Kings is, what are their motivations? Are they trading De'Aaron Fox to start a rebuild, or are they trading De'Aaron Fox to still try and compete while acquiring assets? I kind of lean towards the latter, especially considering I don't know if the general manager, Monty McNair in Sacramento, could have his job survive the Kings just going flat out rebuild. That being said, the Kings will be looking for young, helpful players now, in addition to draft compensation. The Rockets are a team that can provide both. Jackson, in my opinion, there are tiers on this Rockets roster of players that the Kings would be interested in. There's an A tier of players, which to me is like Jabari Smith Jr., and I'm not going to put Alperen Sengun on there because there's no point with Domantas Sabonis here. So I'm leaving Alperen Sengun out of it. I don't think the Rockets would even consider it anyway. So the A tier to me is two guys. It's Jabari Smith Jr. and it's Amin Thompson. And then there's a B tier, which is Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet probably on the edge of B tier, and like Tari Eason. The reason why I lay out these tiers is because I think what the Sacramento Kings are going to ask for, and where this conversation is really going to fall, in addition to draft compensation, is I think the Kings are going to expect one player of both. They're not going to ask for both A-tier players and Smith Jr. Well, maybe they'll ask, but the answer will be no. But the Kings are going to push for one of Thompson or Smith Jr., and then probably one of VanVleet, Tari Eason, and Jalen Green. So saying that and putting that out there, am I already getting into the territory of the Kings are pushing for too much, or do you think this is reasonable?
I think it's already probably pushing into the territory of asking for too much, if only because looking at where the Rockets currently stand and the members of the quote unquote core seven that the Houston Rockets have. So it starts with Jalen Green, Alperen, Sengun, then Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason. Then in the third draft, the Rockets, had of their rebuild, it's Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore. And then most recently, Reed Sheppard selected third overall in this most recent NBA draft. That's your core seven that you're working with. Of those seven players, the two that I feel very, very confident in saying are just absolutely flat out untouchables are Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson. Those two guys are not going anywhere. Outside of those two, then you get into the next tier where I think for the right price, the Rockets would entertain potentially moving one of Jabari Smith Jr. or Tari Eason, but it would have to be for an upgrade that would come on the wings, right? It wouldn't necessarily, I don't think you would envision moving either of those two players who have been incredibly impactful in their roles and with their minutes on the wing for this Rockets team. I don't think that they would feel the need to move either of them unless you're getting back an equivalent upgrade on the wing. So, maybe I could see them moving Jabari or Tari, but it would have to be for a star level player or a significant upgrade on the wing. And then you get into the tertiary group, and that's where you have Jalen Green, Cam Whitmore, and Reed Sheppard. Jalen Green has been pretty inconsistent through his 4 years in the NBA. The highs are incredibly high, though. Like when he's playing at his best, he looks like a future superstar guard. The lows have been incredibly frustrating, though, and that's kind of been the story on Jalen Green through this point in his career. He's just been very inconsistent, a lot of up and down play. Cam Whitmore, incredibly young, still incredibly raw, and after a really impactful rookie season, his nickname is Mr. Per 36 because his impact off the bench was just off the charts. Every single game that he checked in, he would do so much damage in a very small amount of time on the court. He recently got the nod and is now back in the Houston Rockets rotation. And he's going to be, I think, maybe the sticking point as far as an interesting, incredibly high upside piece that the Rockets would love to potentially hold on to, but would probably have to be like the sweetener to maybe make a deal happen. And then Reed Sheppard, who, albeit has had a disappointing start to his rookie season, looks like he's not quite ready for the speed and physicality of the NBA game, but he's also a rookie, right? And it's way too early to like write him off or to label him a bust or anything like that. And if the Kings did want to go into either a full rebuild or at least a world where they could give Reed Sheppard the developmental run and the minutes in, I guess, less high leverage situations, because the Rockets are, near the top of the West and trying to win games and playing for a deep postseason run, ideal everything this season. I do think Reed Sheppard, I'm high on his future, even though he's had a bit of a rocky start to his NBA campaign.
So I'm glad you have the stance that you have, because I think this is exactly how negotiations are going to go. And this is where the gloves come off, or maybe they come on, depending upon if it's a sparring match that you're going for. Because what the Rockets have to understand, and I think you understand this, Jackson, is you are trading for your number one guy. You are trading for a guy that you think is going to be your star. You cannot acquire that without giving up significance in return. You can't. So I understand, hey, the Rockets don't want, like, Amen Thompson's untouchable. Alperen Sengun's untouchable. Again, I don't think Sengun makes any sense in this conversation. That's why he's not going to be included, because of what the Kings have.
And because you want to pair Fox with Sengun. Like, that's the whole point for doing this trade.
Right, 100%. It's very, very tough for these negotiations to go anywhere significant unless the Kings are desperate or don't think they can get the value that they believe they can get for De'Aaron Fox, which at that point I'd say just run the risk of losing him and hold on for a little bit more. Saying that you have two guys that are untouchable in a trade that lands you your new number one guy, it's really difficult. Right. And I totally understand the perspective from the Rockets fans and yourself and the Rock, because it's like, this is what we want to add to this core. We don't want to break the core to add the star. We want to add a star. We want to add the icing on top of the cake. I get that completely. That's just not as realistic in an actual trade being made when there is a star involved, unless there is significant draft compensation added on top of that, which, again, I don't think the Kings are necessarily willing to go full rebuild mode and just take a treasure trove of draft picks back and some of the players you laid out. While I'm not saying it's a deal breaker, we hang up the phone, it's over. That's where I think this is going to be Jackson. And if these negotiations are real, and I do believe they're happening and are going to continue to happen through the summer and through the trade deadline, that's, I think, where we're going to get a sticking point, is the players that the Kings are really going to be pushing for. I think Thompson is going to be the guy that the Kings are really pushing for in this deal. The Rockets might not be willing to move from him, and that might be simply the part of this trade that either team cannot get past.
Yeah, honestly. And at the end of the day, it's because you look up and down of the core seven the Houston Rockets have, even though Alperen Sengun is the closest thing they have to an all-star right now. He's sixth in NBA front court voting for the all-stars in the Western Conference right now. Thompson has the best shot at being a true 1A superstar of this bunch. He's already one of the best perimeter defenders in the entire association. He should get an all-NBA defensive team nod this season for how well the Rockets are playing defensively and his role in the Rockets defensive scheme. His only holdup right now is the outside shooting, and he's already improved drastically in that regard. He's a solid corner 3-point shooter this year after shooting, I think it was 13% on threes his rookie season. He's made a monumental improvement in that regard, and he's only in year 2. He's going to continue to get better. Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't think the Rockets are going to be willing to move on from him in this discussion. Again, if you were entertaining the idea for a true 1A top 10 player in the NBA, then maybe you start to, the Rockets would loosen their grip a little bit on Thompson if they could get a guy like that. Unfortunately, De'Aaron Fox isn't one of those guys. And so I feel like they would stand their ground on not moving on from those players. And again, back to the Jabari Tari part of the discussion, they're very happy with the production from both of those guys, but I understand your standpoint. You have to give something to get something at the end of the day. And because the Rockets do have both of those guys in Jabari and Tari, who play the same position, who are both impactful fours at the NBA level, maybe that is less of a sticking point for the Rockets, and maybe they would be willing to cede one of those guys, potentially maybe Tari Eason, since he's the guy who's been coming off the Rockets bench, and he's a little bit less versatile in his role on the floor. Jabari's kind of that 4 or 5 tweener, can play small ball 5 at times, and still has a lot of upside in his offensive repertoire, even though the advanced stats favor Tari Eason heavily as far as just his overall impact on the game. It's also worth noting in these trade discussions, Tari Eason's currently dealing with this lower left leg soreness. Injury maintenance is what they started calling it. It's been soreness. Now he's out 7 straight games. This is the same leg that sidelined him for 75% of last year's season after having season-ending surgery. So Tari Eason might be damaged goods at this point. I hope not, knocking on wood, all that stuff, but it's at least a concern to be monitored here if you're the Houston Rockets and if you're the Sacramento Kings, a team potentially interested in trading for one of these players.
And I'll add one more bit too. I think what you said is really important from the Kings' perspective, because De'Aaron Fox is not a top 10 player. He plays like he's capable of being it at times, but he's not consistent enough to be a top 10 player. So this is where the seesaw happens, because the Kings have to realize De'Aaron, they believe, is a star. I think the Rockets believe they would be trading for a star. But superstar, perennial all-star, Fox hasn't been that yet. Now, he's in the prime of his career, and he very well may go to Houston, and that unlocks the absolute best of De'Aaron, which is what I think the Rockets make this move with the belief that that's what's going to happen. The Kings, though, probably counter with, from the Rockets' perspective, look, those stars don't become available every single day, right? Like you mentioned Devin Booker. I think most people would probably say Devin Booker is a better player than De'Aaron Fox just based off of history. But I think if you were to put the two against each other, it wouldn't surprise anybody if either side beat the other or either side was better than the other at any given time. That's how close I think those two players are. Now, if we're talking like a SGA, if we're talking an Ant Edwards, I understand it's a completely different tier at this point, but those players aren't going anywhere. The Rockets know this. So the Rockets know. And in fact, by making a Fox trade, those are the teams and those are the players that they're hoping to compete against by getting De'Aaron Fox. So it's an interesting teeter-totter, Jackson, because the Kings have to recognize they don't have a absolute bona fide superstar to make heavy demands. But the Rockets also have to understand, hey, this might be the best that comes available. So we got to pay for that. This is just a leverage 101 conversation.
It really is. And I think the other important part to consider here is, yes, we're focused on De'Aaron Fox here. This is, a Rockets Kings crossover, but the other potential big target on the Rockets radar is Devin Booker. And the reason for that is the Rockets cashed in. They owned the future draft capital of the Brooklyn Nets by way of the James Harden trade a few years back. And they cashed in all of the remaining assets that they own, the future of Brooklyn's draft capital. They traded all that back to Brooklyn this past offseason for Brooklyn to be able to bottom out and have control of its own draft capital in future, which is why they then traded Mikal Bridges to the New York Knicks. And in exchange, the Houston Rockets got their hands on all of the Phoenix Suns' future draft capital. So right now, the Rockets are praying and banking on the downfall of the Phoenix Suns. And if the Suns do decide that they want to turn around and their only recourse is to bottom out and rebuild and start from the bottom and build themselves back up because this core can't get it done with an aging Kevin Durant and a Bradley Beal with a no trade clause in his contract and a Devin Booker who is probably getting more and more disgruntled by the moment in Phoenix, they're going to have to come play ball with the Houston Rockets in order to get access to their picks back. And in fact, the very first one of those picks hits this year. They own the right to swap with the Suns for their 2025 first round draft pick. So if the Suns continue to struggle this year, if they potentially implode in, impressive fashion this year, the Rockets could have themselves another lottery pick in this year's draft to be able to deal with. And that could be an asset that can be used in negotiations with the Suns for a Devin Booker trade, or if this trade gets revisited in the offseason, that's an asset that the Rockets could use in a potential De'Aaron Fox trade this summer.
Leverage. Well, Jackson, before we wrap this up in the next segment, let's see if we can come to an agreement. Let's see if we can try and make a deal and actually get a trade done between these two teams that at least we would agree on. But before that, want to let you know that Locked On Kings and Locked On Rockets are brought to you by another fantastic sponsor. We're talking about Game Time. If you love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy, attending an amazing concert that might come into town and making those core memories, or maybe even you're traveling. Like I went to Las Vegas and checked Game Time to see Bruno Mars tickets or Adele tickets or whatever. Game Time is the number one source that you need to be going through. Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Of course, it's the number one place to get your Rockets and Kings tickets as well. Whether you're looking for games or big events, Game Time Picks will help you find amazing deals, and you can see the most accurate view from your seat before you buy. There's super deals that are particularly impressive, offering great seats at just straight up unbeaten prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. That's a big deal if you've ever bought tickets online. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So I think we're pretty much in agreement that more than likely this trade is happening this summer. And that will give the Kings the context of, can they make it work here in Sacramento? Can they turn their season around, and can they get De'Aaron Fox to reinvest mentally into this team? And he loves this city. He's spoken out repeatedly about how he would love to spend his entire career here in Sacramento, but he doesn't want to go back to the basketball hell days of old. Then the Rockets will get the context of how freaking good and how freaking for real is this team, and how deep of a push can they make this year? Will they be like the Kings 2 years ago, make it to the first round and flame out to a more veteran team, or will they make a run and Ime Udoka's got this team suddenly in a championship window? Context is going to be extremely important. But Jackson, you and I will negotiate right now based off of the context that we have, even though we do say that this trade is probably happening during the summer. So step one is this. Are you stand pat on Thompson is not included in this deal? Is that where we're starting?
He is not included in this deal. It's not going to happen.
Well, for the sake of a entertaining podcast, so I don't just log off, because again, this is where I think the sticking point is going to be in these conversations. I genuinely think. But in the sake of an entertaining podcast, let's say, Thompson's out of it. That means Jabari Smith Jr. has to be in it, or Tari Eason has to be in it. I think the Kings would choose Jabari Smith Jr. over Eason for the injury reasons you laid out. Plus, I just think in terms of more star potential, Jabari Smith Jr. seems to be that guy, at least from my perspective. You can tell me if I'm wrong. So are we okay starting there? That Jabari Smith Jr. has to be a part of this deal then if Amen Thompson is out of it?
I think for the sake of the podcast, we can go that route. I think in all reality, for the reasons that I was laying out before, and again from the whole leverage perspective that we talked about in segment 2, I don't think the Rockets are going to feel the need to go so far as to include him, especially because they basically, I think that they would want to structure this trade primarily. Honestly, the biggest wrinkle here, Matt, that stands out to me that I'm so intrigued by is your point about whether the Kings are doing this trade with the goal of going into a full rebuild, or doing this trade with the hope of remaining somewhat competitive, because that provides the interesting avenue of, if the Rockets want to include Fred VanVleet in this deal, right? He's got a team option at the end of this year. He's vastly overpaid for what he gives you right now. The Rockets paid, a premium. They paid the loser tax, whatever, to bring him to Houston when they were one of the worst teams in the NBA. And he helped them turn this franchise around and get them back to playing winning basketball. But if the Kings are looking to, I don't want to say tread water, but if they're looking to kind of retool, I guess, in the move on from De'Aaron Fox and have a suitable veteran point guard take over the reins, but also get an infusion of young talent and future capital in order to kind of, bridge the gap into whatever the next version of Kings basketball looks like without doing a full-blown fire sale, moving De'Aaron Fox, moving Sabonis, all that stuff, trying to find a suitor for DeMar DeRozan after just acquiring him this offseason, all those different things, then I think that provides a much more interesting dynamic for this trade, where you're looking at something like, Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, and then, maybe Eason thrown in there, maybe Cam, maybe Reed Sheppard, as well as some draft capital. That gets to become a really interesting conversation at that point. And then you'd also need more pieces besides just De'Aaron Fox coming back to Houston, because you need to be able to offset all that salary. Because right now, this upcoming offseason, if they pick up that player out, the team option, he's going to be making close to $50 million, like 47, 48, something like that. And then Jalen Green's extension kicks in and he'll be making $33 million. So that's a ton of salary that Sacramento would be absorbing, in addition to any other pieces that would be coming back, like Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason, Reed Sheppard, possibly, all those guys.
So again, this is important context for how I believe a trade negotiation will go. I can see the Sacramento Kings fan comment section right now, Jackson, and what they're saying is, like, the Rockets can't get De'Aaron Fox for trading the pieces that they don't necessarily want or they don't see as part of their long term. It just doesn't make sense. And I'm not saying Tari Eason is that, but I don't see a scenario where the Sacramento Kings trade De'Aaron Fox to Houston and Houston still has Smith Jr., Amen Thompson, and Alperen Sengun on their roster. I don't think that exists. I don't think that's realistic.
Can I raise you then? What would be the trade package that any other team could come up with that would beat? Because I think the Rockets' best offer, this is where I'll just tee it up right here. I think the Rockets' best offer is some combo of Fred and or Jalen Green, again, depending on what the Kings' goals are here. Cam Whitmore and Reed Sheppard. So you get 2, potentially 3 young prospects in Jalen Green, Cam, and Reed Sheppard, as well as the influx of anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 draft picks. Again, you can haggle over the amount of picks, whatever, involved in this, whether they're swaps, the valuation of said picks, right? Whether they're the Rockets' own picks, or potentially the Kings would want to maybe pry away some of those future Suns picks because Phoenix's downfall looks imminent. Those have a ton of value as well. What other trade package? Again, the Spurs are heavily rumored as a potential suitor. I don't think the Spurs have a package that comes anywhere close to even the Rockets' worst trade package in these discussions. Do you?
I think that's 100% fair. And again, here we talk about just another leverage element to this. But here's what I hear, Jackson. Here's high potential but unproven talent for a proven star caliber player. That is what we can attach names to it, or we can take names away. That's essentially what we're saying here. The most proven talent in Houston, you're saying, is not on the table for De'Aaron Fox, who again would be coming to Houston to be your number one guy. Again, I don't think that's realistic. And again, that's probably, if the trade negotiations end there, that's probably pretty realistic. This is not just two podcast hosts sparring on who they think is overvaluing each talent. This is real. This is how it is. And I do agree with you completely that, and we kind of laid this out at the beginning, Houston can offer or can give the Kings the best package. But Houston is also hands down getting the best player. So while leverage is important too, well, the other teams can't give you what you're looking for, and every team is going to push and try and play the leverage of, well, you might lose De'Aaron Fox for nothing, then you're really screwed. Every team should play that card. They have that card, and the Kings need to be ready to defend against that card. There is no scenario where the Sacramento Kings get the best player in this deal. That is done. No matter who they trade with, there is no scenario where they get the best player. So I don't know if another team could offer a better overall package in terms of prospects and draft picks and assets. But there might and probably will be another team out there that will ultimately offer the Kings a better player today or at the time of the trade than any of those players that you just named. And if the Sacramento Kings are trying to win or still trying to compete, they're going to go that route if Houston's not willing to budge. So I think that's just important to
and I think that's what makes this so fascinating, because again, if it were Sacramento just, hey, we're just hitting the reset button, we're gonna blow it all up, and we're trading Fox, the next on the trade block is gonna be Sabonis, then DeMar, like whatever, then I think the Rockets trade package becomes, you start looking at it through a different lens. You're like, okay,
Bingo.
3 incredibly high upside prospects. The guy just drafted 3rd overall, Cam Whitmore, who was a highly touted prospect. He was ranked anywhere from top 5, top 7 in his draft, but then somehow fell all the way to 20th because of some of the pre-draft concerns about his personality, whatever. But he's got talent off the charts on paper, not even on paper, on the court. You see it you see it in action. He is an electrifying scorer, a legit bucket getter, and has bought in now under some of the new defensive principles that Ime Udoka is trying to instill, trying to get him to play a more team-oriented style of basketball. And you're seeing those lessons really start to take hold with him. And that's why I actually walk away thinking Cam Whitmore, of all these other pieces that we're talking about in this trade, it might be a mistake for the Houston Rockets to just throw Cam Whitmore in as like just here, take Cam Whitmore, take Jalen, take Reed Sheppard. You might turn around and think that might be an overpay. Cam Whitmore's future is really that bright at the NBA level. And I'm a really big believer in Reed Sheppard. I just think that for where the Houston Rockets are at, there have been a couple, I guess, casualties of their expedited rebuilding process. And those two casualties have been Cam Whitmore, who was kind of, ousted from the rotation earlier this season, and has now found his way back. And then Reed Sheppard, who again doesn't get the true developmental runway that a top 3 overall pick should get, where he gets 30, 35 minutes a night to make mistakes and learn on the fly and grow. And he's had to make do with very little, in the way of opportunity in the Rockets rotation. And he's done, okay in the minutes he's gotten. He's translated defensively. The shot just hasn't fallen at the NBA level. So, again, the Rockets aren't pressured to make this move right now, especially when, even if it's, still a potential long shot, whatever, when they have their eyes or could have their eyes set on Devin Booker as well. And that's why I think when you look at what the Kings might be being offered from other teams, San Antonio or any other mystery third team that wants to get involved in the De'Aaron Fox sweepstakes, I still think the Rockets' worst offer of potentially Jalen, Cam, Reed, and a swath of draft picks still probably beats out the best offer from a rebuilding perspective and from a restart perspective than any other trade that might materialize for the Kings. But if the Kings want to stay relevant, if they want to be able to still win games at a high level, the Rockets might still be able to beat any other offer, because again, if you tell me maybe you swap out Jalen, you put in Fred VanVleet, or you include Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green and Cam and Reed, then Fred gives you a suitable point guard replacement. He gives you a guy that's going to be a veteran. He's going to be a good table setter. He'll keep the wheels turning. He's not going to bring you near the production that De'Aaron Fox does on a nightly basis, but he will keep you, he will prevent you from becoming a bottom dweller team. Plus all the other young pieces that you hope one or two or all three of them hit as a result of this trade in order to turn around and say, hey, the Kings, they won this trade, right? They got rid of Fox, but they won this trade. And again, if a trade doesn't materialize between the Rockets and Kings, then the Rockets just shift their eyes and they set their sights on Phoenix. And it's that simple for Houston. That's why in this, over the course of this show and throughout this discussion, there's very little pressure, I think, on the Rockets to cave to whatever the Kings' ultimate demands are. It's what the Rockets are willing to deal. And I still think that their trade package is a very enticing offer if the Kings decide they want to go the rebuild route, not necessarily the we want to stay competitive route.
So here's what I think we should do for this conversation. And it might be disappointing from a listener perspective, but I think it's good. I think this conversation needs to be tabled. And I think this conversation needs to be revisited either right before the trade deadline, and maybe you and I, maybe we can do an episode before that. I think more importantly, I think this needs to be tabled till the end of the season, because I think Fox is still going to be there. I think the Rockets are going to have the context of how good they are. The Kings are going to have the context of, is it over, or can they salvage it, or what route do they want to go? Once we have that context, then we might come back together to reignite these conversations again, which again, that might be exactly what is happening or has happened in these actual true life negotiations. They might be having a very similar conversation to what we had and said, we'll revisit this in a few months. That might be exactly what's going on.
And can I add one more note here that is it is another very interesting wrinkle to consider is De'Aaron Fox is playing out of his mind right now. The numbers are sensational. If De'Aaron Fox makes it on an all-NBA team this year, then he becomes supermax eligible this offseason.
And he ain't going nowhere.
Yeah, right. Like if he becomes supermax eligible, there is no way that he's turning down a $300+ million contract to stay in Sacramento. And then suddenly the discussions are gone. He's gonna ink that deal.
Yep.
And even if he inks that deal and then 6 months later or whatever, when he does become trade eligible, then he's like, all right, get me out of here. But that becomes a conversation for another day. That's that you kick the can much further down the road. So if Fox does make it to an all NBA team, again, all he has to do is make all NBA third team, and then he is supermax eligible. That's another thing to consider here if you're the Kings or the Rockets.
So there you have it. A negotiation with no deal, which I think is very honestly
probably happens every single day in the NBA.
Very, very accurate. And to me, I thought this was an enlightening, very fun conversation. Hopefully both Rockets fans and Kings fans feel the same way. Don't go to war too much with each other about who's giving up more or the assets giving up. I think it's an important conversation. I think it fulfills the point of this exercise, which is what is really going on in these deals. And it's always difficult to trade a star, and it's always difficult to ask for a lot of young talent on an up and coming team. But it's happened before. The Kings had to trade Tyrese Halliburton away to bring Domantas Sabonis to be a number 2 in Sacramento. Houston's looking for their number 1 in De'Aaron Fox. So you never know where those conversations are going to go. Plus, the market has been thrown off of its axis by the Mikal Bridges trade and the Rudy Gobert trade of old. We're still recovering from that nonsense too. So I don't think we're going that far.
A star trade in today's economy, Matt? Are you kidding me?
I need 20 first-round picks, and I need half of the ownership stake in the Rockets. That's. Oh
my God! Have you seen the meme of the guy in the drive-thru? He's like, I need 55 burgers, 55 large fries, 55 this, 55. Like that's what this is with first-round draft picks. Just.
Well, we'll see where this conversation goes, and we'll see if it picks up more steam, Jackson. We might have to do this sooner than we expect. But thank you. This was enlightening. This was fun. And now Kings fans, Rockets fans, negotiate amongst yourselves. See if you can come up with a deal that Jackson and I could not come up with.
That's going to do it for our crossover edition episode with Matt George from Locked On Kings. I hope it was an illuminating discussion, getting both sides of the argument, understanding the Kings' perspective in a potential Fox deal as well as the Rockets' perspective. We want your thoughts, though, in the YouTube comments. Be sure to leave us your remarks about any potential trade scenarios or how you would feel about De'Aaron Fox coming to the Houston Rockets. Now, remember, the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop the comments while you're there. Subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.